Good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Monica Tulsile Buddha. I am currently employed by the University of Mpumalanga, but I have studied from undergraduate to postgraduate at the Northwest University, studied the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems, Master of Indigenous Knowledge Systems, and PhD in Social Sciences with Indigenous Knowledge Systems. Those who do not know, the Northwest University is the only university in this entire continent that produces IKS qualification from undergraduate to PhD studies. My topic or my presentation today looks at the promotion, the preservation, and the dissemination of Indigenous knowledge systems in South Africa. And this topic is very much important because most of the time when we think of the promotion and the preservation, we look at maybe how the government has protected Indigenous knowledge, but it goes beyond that. It looks at how also, sorry, let me do the slideshow. It also looks at how communities and how higher institutions, including libraries, have documented Indigenous knowledge systems. Professor Ngulube's work most of the time looks at IKS and documentation, looking at the role of libraries, which I've read some of his work. But today, I just want us to focus on the promotion, protection, and dissemination, looking at the works that has been done by the Department of Science and Innovation and the work that has been done by the Department of Higher Education. I am not saying that other departments in this country have not done much on IKS, because if we look at the Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, has an IKS panel that advises the minister on Indigenous knowledge systems, which was a part of since the age of 27. And of course, there are other initiatives of preserving Indigenous knowledge systems. But the reason why I want us to look at the Department of Science and Innovation, it is because of the documentation of IKS using the National Recordal System, but now it's called the National Indigenous Knowledge Recordal System, the NICMAS, the NICSO. So I want us to see how the department has worked towards documenting or preserving, promoting, and disseminating IKS, and also looking at how higher education also did the same. For colleagues who do not know, the Department of Science and Innovation, when it was the Department of Science and Technology, initially started the conversations on IKS around 1998, and hence why I think maybe if we look at its background going forward, we can manage to link it to higher education. So the outline of my study today looks at the introduction. It looks at Indigenous methods that have been used by communities, of course, to promote, preserve, and disseminate Indigenous knowledge. And we look at the DSI, we look at DHEAD, and challenges and prospects, and conclusion. So for those who do not know what is Indigenous knowledge systems or what are Indigenous knowledge systems, these are practices and knowledges that Indigenous cultures or Indigenous people use to construct their significance and belief systems, which need to be documented or which needs to be preserved. In South Africa, measures have been taken to document Indigenous knowledge or Indigenous knowledge systems using units, centers, systems, and offices associated with government departments. As I've mentioned, the DSI and the DHEAD, which are government departments. While the documenting or the preservation of IKS has brought out new avenues for knowledge preservation, exchange, and application, it has also presented new obstacles to long-term preservation and accessibility of this information. Special attention of this presentation is given to the National Indigenous Knowledge Systems Office, which is NICMAS, the National Indigenous Knowledge Systems, or Management System, which is NICMAS, the National Indigenous Knowledge Systems Office, which is NICSO, National Indigenous Knowledge Registration System, which was formerly known as the National Recordal System, and the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Documentation Centers, including also the universities which are mandated and bound by policies. So in this country, we have universities which are bounded by policy and which have a mandate to integrate and to include Indigenous knowledge systems as part of their curriculum, or to formulate Indigenous knowledge systems programs. So the Indigenous methods that we use or communities use, I like to say we because I believe that I am a member of the community. I exist because of the Ndebele people, so I can never distinguish myself from the Ndebele people. Instead, I am their representative in higher education, so hence why I always refer to we. So Indigenous communities use, oral transmission, observation, participation, and apprenticeship. So orally, that's when knowledge is shared. I believe that Prof. Shai did mention that it's shared from, word of mouth. Observation, that's when you observe what it is done by an expert. So you observe for a period of time, and then they allow you to participate slowly so that they get to understand if you have done the work or if you understand the work. Once you have perfected your craft, and then now you are allowed to practice. So you are told how to do this. You then observe how it's done. You then participate, and then now you are left to practice. Those are Indigenous methods of preserving knowledge, because if you manage to practice, you'll be able to teach other people or your students in the future or the next generation. Of course, you're going to use the same methods, which is orally, observation, participation, and apprenticeship. The work of the Department of Science and Innovation. So the Department of Science and Innovation, which then was the Department of Science and Technology, played a vital role in the development of the IKS policy of 2004. The department also played an important role in the IKS Bill of 2016, which was changed to be an IK Act of 2019. I have colleagues from the Northwest University who have contributed to the establishment of the IK Act of 2019. The department also assisted with the access to benefit sharing when the former minister, Honorable Naledi Pandor, indicated that IKS becomes a priority or should be a priority in South Africa, and communities should have access to benefit sharing. And the department took an initiative to make sure that communities are no longer exploited, because there are people who visit Indigenous communities who give money to Indigenous traditional leaders, and in exchange to knowledge or in exchange to land, knowing very well what's the use or the resources that are associated with that land. Sometimes they will even buy certain Indigenous crafts or Indigenous items, for instance, in bulks and sell them. Another example that could be made, colleagues, if we know about the Hoodia plant story of the Khoi people, where they did not benefit from its commercialization in the late 90s. And now the Khoi Council, the Khoisan Council, had to be established in order for the Khoi people to benefit from the usage of Hoodia, which is a hunger suppressant plant. It is such initiatives that were taken to make sure that further exploitation does not happen, because most of Indigenous knowledge custodians are elderly people who have never attended any formal schooling. Now, I'm very careful, colleagues, when I speak of schooling, I do not say schooling in general, because our Indigenous custodians understand Indigenous education. So here we are looking at the formal structures of schooling. So because they have never attended, they lack knowledge on how to preserve their Indigenous knowledge. They do not understand structures that are in place, and hence why there is always an exploiter coming to the community, making them sign documents, making them or deceiving them without giving them proper contracts, and hence why there is so much there are so much indigenous items which are not currently in Africa and which are sold in billions, or which are in other museums, for instance, and they were either taken by deceit, or people signed out without understanding that their products will be sold 3 or 4 times the number. And because people are hungry at that time, the indigenous people are hungry at that time, they're willing to sell their product using the cheapest price. Sorry about that. And then the Department of Science and Innovation developed the NICSO portal, the NICMAS, the National Recordal System, National Indigenous Knowledge System, Recordal System. Sorry.
Dr. Buddha,
yes?
It's fine. You can take a moment.
I don't know what's happening.
It's fine. You can take a moment
Okay,
and have a glass of water. Yeah.
Much better. Okay. And then the Department of Science and Innovation assists with the funding of ICAS projects, and then funding of undergraduate and postgraduate studies in IKS. When I was doing my first year in 2013, when the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems started by the Northwest University in 2013, for the first time in Africa, our first funder for the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems was the Department of Science and Innovation. On our second year, it is when the Department of Arts and Culture, or the Department of Sports and Arts and Culture, also assisted in funding the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems students. But initially, it was the initiative of the Department of Science and Innovation to fund the 21st African cohort of the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems, which was registered with the Northwest University. So colleagues, I spoke about NICMAS, I spoke about NICSO, and the National Indigenous Knowledge Systems Recordal System, and then here, the facts about NICMAS. So this chart was taken from the NICMAS page, the DSI NICMAS page, and this chart is very important because it highlights the documentation centers that are registered with the DSI. And then the communities which are registered, the claims that happened over the years regarding Indigenous knowledge systems, the knowledge holders which are registered with the DSI, and then open Indigenous knowledge that can be accessible, or that could, that is for people, from outside people, and then confidential Indigenous knowledge. So in terms of the open Indigenous knowledge, let us not forget, colleagues, that in each and every culture or cultural practice, there is knowledge that is accessible to the whole community, or common knowledge. And then there is sacred knowledge. You have to go to undergo through certain cultural initiations. You have to be initiated until you get to a certain point where it is believed that this knowledge can be acquired by you. Making a critical example about ubungoma, traditional healing. For you to be known as a traditional healer, or ugobela, for instance, there are certain protocols, practices, rituals you have to go through. For me to be seen as maybe a grown woman, I am not born as old or grown, but the knowledge that I had when I was a toddler is different from a knowledge that I know as a teenager. And once I go to initiation school for girls, making an example, there is a knowledge that I know that a toddler does not know. And the knowledge that I know once I get to be married, there is certain knowledge that is shared with me. So the knowledge of married women is not known by maidens. It is such knowledge that is shared according to your status or level in the community. So I'm making an example referring to the open Indigenous knowledge and the confidential Indigenous knowledge. I can't see you, so I hope we are still together because I'm reading and I'm unable to see you.
Yes, we are still.
Okay, thank you so much, colleague. So, another slide that I want us to look at is adopting of African Indigenous knowledge in higher education as means of decolonization or as means of preserving, promotion, and dissemination, right? So we spoke about DSI and what it does for the community, and we spoke about community methods that are used to preserve their knowledge, which they have used for decades before the democratic government, even though during colonization and apartheid, there were acts, policies that were hindering people from practicing such certain Indigenous knowledge systems. But because Indigenous knowledge systems is resilient, it managed to withstand the test of time, withstood the hot seat that it was in, and and it found itself to where we are today. So we've looked at that, but here I want us to look at how education has contributed. So there is a need to assess the developments in higher education in South Africa regarding African Indigenous knowledge systems, since Indigenous ways of life have not always been considered in education. And Indigenous students have been forced to suppress this knowledge to achieve the Western objectives of thinking, acting, and believing like a scientist. So to be a scientist, you have to, adhere to Western methods, and now you will be seen as a scientist. And hence why, if you can tell someone that your grandmother is a scientist, is an Indigenous scientist, one person would argue that, are you referring to witchcraft? Because, we've been told we've been trained to hate ourselves for too long that if you were to speak of Indigenous science, someone is thinking of wizardry and witchcraft and someone flying with a broom at night. But here we are looking at Indigenous knowledge systems as complex. So because we were trained to see our knowledge as primitive. For you to be regarded as a scientist, you have to have been Western trained for you to get those accolades. So another fundamental issue is that education structures that are the legacy of colonization, I've indicated that, and are founded on cultural norms that are not shared by most African Indigenous groups. And hence why from primary school, if a child cannot adapt to the school system, usually they drop out and they are deemed as dumb, they are deemed as slow, they are deemed as failures in the communities, forgetting that these children are from Indigenous communities. They have learned Indigenous education. They are exposed to Indigenous education, which is practiced by their mothers and their fathers and their elders. It is such children. For instance, if you can send a boy to be a cattle header of 100 cows, this boy, if one cow gets missing, he will know that one of my father's cows is missing, and these cows are 100. But he might find it difficult to calculate 1 + 1 is 2, because for you to understand 1 + 1 is 2, you need to cram that 1 + 1 is 2. How and when, sorry, did we achieve that 1 + 1 is 2? How did we achieve that? But if you were to give him 4 cows and say, how many cows are here? Because they are practical. He's able to see these cows. He has a relationship with these cows. They are home. He has a spiritual connection with his father's cows. He knows that there are 4. He knows their name. He knows their names, and he knows what their fundamental roles are. Because if we say, for instance, we look at cows, if we look at Lobola, which cow stands for what, which cow is for what. During that process, you'll understand that each and every cow has its role. So such people or such children, they know the names of those cows. They know if a cow out of 100 is missing. It's the same thing. Making an example of myself as a Ndebele, I am exposed to Ndebele women painting, because the Ndebele art that you know and see on TV is a cultural practice that is done by almost all Ndebele elderly women, and that knowledge should be part of the curriculum, because we practice this as at home. I see the Ndebele triangles, I see the Ndebele rectangles, I see the Ndebele circles. And if a teacher presents such concepts in class, I will be able to relate, because I have seen it at home. And if I see that these concepts or these shapes, for instance, or the patterns are presented using Ndebele art, for instance, they are taken out from the Ndebele art, making an example, I feel proud to say, oh, my grandmother does this at home. Oh, this is a Ndebele mural art. It's there at home. Oh, it has a circle. It has a square. Now I get home excited to tell my grandmother that actually this is symmetrical geometry, or this is mathematics, making an example. So higher education, going back to the topic so that I don't lose myself. Higher education is one of the most important tools or structures for strengthening rather than dismantling this practice. The Indigenous Knowledge Systems audit undertaken in the South African higher education system has made inroads into the system. According to Kimwaga 2009, because of African Indigenous knowledge system were historically marginalized, their incorporation in higher education allows African educators and students to reassess the inherent structures of knowledge systems. Now, the universities of South Africa that has taken initiative to protect, promote, document, disseminate Indigenous knowledge systems are as follows. The University of KwaZulu-Natal has what we call a Center of Excellence in partnership with the Department of Science and Innovation and the National Research Foundation. Its duty is to look at IKS as research and work with the DSI NRF in also providing funding for postgraduate students in IKS and also research projects. But they do also look at the documentation of Indigenous communities, where they have researchers who go to Indigenous communities to collect or to document, to collect the knowledge, of course. So the Northwest University, I've indicated before, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, that the Northwest University is the first university in this entire continent, African continent to say, to produce qualifications on Indigenous knowledge systems, which the negotiations have started in 1998. Of course, I'm coming to that slide, but it also does have what we call a documentation center. So there is what we call an Indigenous Knowledge Systems Center, which produces the qualifications, and also a documentation center within that center that focuses on working with communities and documenting their knowledge. University of Zululand is also one of the universities that have documentation centers where they work with Indigenous communities to document, preserve, promote, and disseminate the knowledge. The University of Free State has Professor Conway, who also works with communities and has a documentation center, and also has good partnerships with the Department of Science and Innovation. The University of Limpopo, together with the University of Venda, have taken initiatives also to develop the documentation centers, which are currently in process. So there are registered universities that have registered in the documentation centers, and the documentation centers are currently underway. So we are very excited to see this this taking place in Limpopo, where the University of Limpopo and the University of Venda are in partnership to ensure that the documentation centers become a success, which currently, like I'm saying, they are in progress. And maybe as we speak, the process might be almost complete. I just do not have the information. So we have the University of Fort Hare also, CPUT, and WUSU. Here, WUSU, Professor Jonas Sileti is one of the veterans within the IKS sector or within the IKS discipline, who's working with WUSU to develop or to have developed the documentation center. On the 29th of August, colleagues, until the 1st of September, the University of let me say WUSU, Forte, and two other universities, which is Rhodes and Nelson Mandela, had a provincial conference on IKS in August, which is evidence that these four universities are working together towards promoting IKS, preserving and disseminating. Of course, they were led by Professor Jonas Sileti, who has also contributed in the formulation or in the initial stages of creating the IKS program at the Northwest University, together with Professor Kaya, who is the director of the UKZN's IKS Center of Excellence. Continuation. So the IKS documentation centers are a part of the National Indigenous Knowledge Systems knowledge registration system. The Department of Science and Innovation's goal is to create Indigenous Knowledge Systems documentation centers in each and every province. So I've shown you the chart, colleagues, that there are about 10 Indigenous Knowledge Systems documentation centers, and I have linked a few universities that are, responsible for the documentation centers. But I've only mentioned universities, but there are other cultural structures that are associated with other documentation centers. So if you know any documentation center that I have not mentioned, is possibly maybe that is not linked to the universities that I've mentioned, but we have 10 in total. Under the Protection, Promotion, Development and Management of the Indigenous Knowledge Systems Act number 6 of the 2019 IKS Act, the National Indigenous Knowledge Systems Registration System, formerly known as the NRS, and the National IKS Management System serves as an information and communication technology platform for the management of Indigenous knowledge systems. So this information is available on the NICMAS page. The technological platform that helps communities register their Indigenous knowledge is called the IK registration system and is connected to the IKS documentation centers. So colleagues, in the previous years, people did not know how can this knowledge be preserved? How can it be preserved using the modern systems? Of course, they know the indigenous systems, but not the modern systems. And hence why the documentation centers are there, because they work hand in hand with the community. In the previous years, the structure was a bottom-up approach where communities did not understand structures in place, and hence why they were exploited, hence why the exploitation was at the highest level. But the Department of Science and Innovation developed the documentation centers so that we go to the communities because they have knowledge. We go to them as learners instead of knowers. We take off our red gowns when we go to indigenous communities to become learners so that we are allowed in their spaces and they are free to share their knowledge with us without us imposing our own worldviews, imposing who we think we are, and undermining their worldviews. Now, colleagues, indigenous communities have been undermined for a long time and misrepresented in academic spaces. Hence why the Indigenous Knowledge Systems program exists in order for students to be trained on how to approach their indigenous communities so that they can be the representatives of those communities, because they are a part of those communities. So they need to use proper methodologies to approach, proper methods to approach the communities, to form good relationships, to understand that they are learners instead of knowers, and that indigenous knowledge holders are custodians and they are teachers of this knowledge. And for us as scholars and members of the community to access this community, we have to leave our qualifications the moment we leave our offices and when we go to Indigenous communities. So we need to know that communities control the ownership of Indigenous knowledge information that may be accessed and published via the National Indigenous Knowledge Systems Registration System, National Indigenous Registration System. Permission and authorization are necessary in order to access this using the IK registration system. A recordal system should guarantee knowledge rights by allowing communities and other IK holders to sequentially record their knowledge holdings to help them participate in future knowledge economy, educational and economic gains and social good. So Indigenous people need to understand that their Indigenous knowledge is economy, and they should be allowed to participate in structures where they will gain financially, where they can even educate people about their Indigenous knowledge. And hence why universities have to once in a while invite Indigenous communities, Indigenous custodians, to be the ones to teach in class on their, to teach about their Indigenous knowledge systems in classrooms. And hence why when there are events, each and every event that has to do with culture or Indigenous languages has to have traditional authority or has to have knowledge holders associated with it. So we can never, as formal structures or universities or institutions, remove ourselves from Indigenous communities and later go and try to collect data or try to work with them. After working with them, we disappear. And that's what has always been happening, because they've been exploited. We go, we take, we leave, we further explore, and then we see how can we commercialize from what we've been told. So for a long time, they've been misrepresented, and hence why other communities do not want researchers, because they know that their knowledge can be, further investigated or further explored and sold and commercialized, so they do not get to benefit anything. Hence why the access to benefit sharing agreement is necessary. Now, colleagues, as I've mentioned, just want to mention that in South Africa, there are 3 universities that have been mandated to produce Indigenous knowledge systems programs. So this is a curriculum. So they have the mandate to produce the curriculum. Now let's look at how the Northwest University started with its journey. In 1998, ladies and gentlemen, there was a national workshop at the Northwest University. And the agreement was that the Northwest University has to integrate IKS in the curriculum. The national workshop was, of course, involving government. In 2001, the Northwest University began the development and incorporating IKS in its undergraduate and postgraduate research, teaching, learning, and community engagement curricula. Institutional, national, continental, and global imperatives drove the decision to integrate Indigenous knowledge systems, or African Indigenous knowledge systems, let me just put it that way, colleagues, into the institution's core business, covering the areas mentioned in the above in keeping with the institution's vision and mission and the goals of the 2024 Department of Science and Technology, goals of the 2004, I apologize, goals of the 2004's Department of Science and Technology, now known as DSI, and the new Partnership for African Development, which is also known as NEPAD. This decision enabled the development of the National Indigenous Knowledge Systems Policy of 2004. Designated the promotion of IKS in higher education as a critical component of human capital and the transformation dimension of higher education. The panel over the years that developed the IKS program is as follows, but not limited to: the late Professor M. Nkondo, Professor Wali Sirote, Professor Yona Sileti, Professor Hassan Kaya, and Professor Nomolungelo Oduka. Okay, let me just go back to the slide. So in 2001, as I've mentioned, so when the IKS program began in 2001, it was called the Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Knowledge Systems, the Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Knowledge Systems. In 2013, the Northwest University changed its curriculum and introduced a revised program which was now called the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems, removing arts and indicating that Indigenous Knowledge Systems is not arts, it's science. The Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge System program was started with 20 students, becoming its first inception or its first in Africa in 2013. The Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge System program has 4 streams, which are health, agriculture, science and technology, and arts and culture. In 2017, the Northwest University graduated its first BIKS cohort, and it was the first ever in Africa, with 1 student, which is me, presenting, obtaining the qualification with distinction, making me the first BIKS distinction student in the entire continent. Between the year 2019 and 2023, the Northwest University has graduated 6 master's degree holders and 2 PhD graduates from the 2013 cohort. Yet again, in 2022, I became the first PhD output from the Northwest University's Indigenous Knowledge Systems PhD. So I am the first 2022 PhD holder in Indigenous Knowledge Systems. The Northwest University, as I've indicated, is the only one in this country that offers authorized IKS undergraduate and postgraduate degrees, Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems, Master of Indigenous Knowledge Systems, and PhD in Social Sciences with Indigenous Knowledge Systems, of all which are accredited by South African Qualification Authority. Now, the University of Venda in 2014, just a year later, followed the Northwest University in introducing the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems. The University of Venda currently only has the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems. It does not have IKS in a postgraduate level, hence why I've indicated that NW is the only one with undergrad and postgraduate. So University of Venda followed in 2014, introducing the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems with 1 stream, and we hope actually in 2025 they are introducing another stream. So the streams are supposed to be 4 in number, and the progress is good thus far. The University of Limpopo is supposed to be having an IKS curriculum, but it should be mentioned that in 2021, the Department of Science and Innovation planned to open a cutting-edge African Center of Excellence in the University of Limpopo, and hence why when I mentioned universities with IKS documentation centers, I did mention University of Limpopo because of this important meeting that was held in 2001. So the University of Limpopo is supposed to not only the documentation center, but also have the curriculum in IKS, which it was mandated with the Univen and the University of the Northwest University. So it's NW, Univen, and the University of Limpopo who are supposed to form the IKS curriculum. So I believe that the University of Limpopo has started with the documentation center and will later introduce the curriculum. Unfortunately, I do not have any information. The only information I have right now is that it has a registered documentation center in partnership with Univen. So the registration centers, the documentation centers are currently in Limpopo. So as I've indicated, colleagues, these are universities that have been, mandated to document, but not only document, to promote, preserve, and disseminate Indigenous knowledge, to train professionals on how to be Indigenous scholars for the first time in Africa, and also to represent the Indigenous communities, to use appropriate methodologies when approaching Indigenous communities, to rewrite the history that was written about Africans using Indigenous lenses. The Northwest University, as I've indicated, it has the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems with 4 streams, Master of Indigenous Knowledge Systems, which is a full dissertation, Doctor of Philosophy with Indigenous Knowledge Systems, which is a full thesis. The University of Venda currently has the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems with 1 stream in 2024. The University of Limpopo has IKS modules. In level 3, which is what, 3rd year, it has IKS in the BA program, and then also in cultural studies in 3rd year. And then the anthropology discipline also has IKS, an IKS module at an honors level. This is what is currently available, and you can even access it on their website. So in this case, we can even, give Univen and UN credits that they've started with the process. And as I've indicated, we are waiting for Univen to develop IKS in a master's and PhD level, and we are waiting for the University of Limpopo to develop IKS as a program and not modules. But having them as modules, I believe that it is a process of understanding on ways to go about developing the program while they're still working on the documentation center. So indeed, colleagues, there is movement and there is progress in terms of integrating IKS in higher education. Now, a lot of people ask, why should we promote, preserve, and document IKS in higher education? Why is IKS important? Why should we study IKS and use methods and train people to be experts in this discipline? Because IKS for a very long time has been integrated in other disciplines such as anthropology and other disciplines. Why is it important? Now, IKS contributes to decoloniality. It decolonizes how education has been seen, has been viewed, and the Western knowledge systems as the only knowledge systems to practice or to know. It involves the community, so the community becomes the leaders of the program. They become integrated in the teaching, learning, and research. It involves or it contributes to economic development on how can communities be developed. We as Indigenous scholars should assist communities on how they can economically develop using their knowledge on the structures that are there, such as the national recordal systems and NICSO and NICMAS. We just spoke about them, on ways to protect their Indigenous knowledge and the access to benefit sharing. So it is up to us to go to those communities and to assist the communities. But not only the communities are benefiting, us also as Indigenous scholars should see other means of becoming entrepreneurs using Indigenous knowledge. What is it that we can do to develop ourselves, besides the academic space, to create job opportunities and to create wealth using this knowledge? And the IKS policy of 2004 does indicate that Indigenous people should work towards job and wealth creation using their knowledge. So this economic development is not only for Indigenous communities. Of course, they are the priority, but it also speaks to us as Indigenous scholars to look at Indigenous knowledge beyond the academic space, to look at it in how can we benefit also, which strategies or which ways can we follow in order to benefit from this knowledge. For instance, I am a children's author, so I focus on children's literature, and I write on Indigenous knowledge for children using Indigenous languages or using my Indigenous language. And I have assisted in so many projects, including a project that I'm busy with right now with Prof. English, who's known also as the father of ethnomathematics in the University of Michigan, where we store or where we promote crafts in South Africa. And those are other methods that I look at on how I can develop the community economically, but also it creates a platform for me to also think on how I can benefit economically, as I've indicated that I'm also an author, and I can look at other strategies, open maybe a beauty shop focusing on Indigenous herbs only, making an example on IKS is not limited, but it's a very broad discipline where also Indigenous scholars can benefit. Now, it also looks at research and innovation. Very important point, colleagues, that I want to address, and I've addressed it before, and I've indicated that Indigenous communities have been misrepresented. They've been made subjects of their own knowledge. They've been made to think that there are ways of knowing, ways of being, and ways of living are primitive, or they are false by researchers, or they are barbaric, they are old-fashioned, or they should not matter. And because of that, they felt inferior for a long time. The researchers will come, collect, and leave without developing the community. So people come and take without further looking at how the community can be developed or how the communities can be developed. And hence why the IKS program indicates or guides through the indigenous, the philosophical underpinnings that researchers have to go through or have to understand, such as indigenous methodologies, looking at the indigenous worldviews, looking at Ubuntu, for instance, as methodologies to use when conducting research with indigenous people. So here we are amending what has been broken. We are representing, we are writing the correct language. We are advocates of indigenous knowledge. We go to our communities humble and understanding who they are. We do not question if the community says our people are from the stars, or we originate from the stars or from the sun, and that is why our surname is linked to the sun. We do not question, rather we accept. When they do their cultural practices, we participate instead of questioning and sitting there looking like we are shocked. We participate because for us to gain certain levels or certain knowledge, and for us to be trusted, we need to be part of the community, and hence why ethnographic studies, for instance, are important. Now, partnerships. The IKS in higher education allows partnerships, not only in department, not only department partnerships like DSI, Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, DSEC, or Department of Tourism or Trade and Industry, but also other universities outside South Africa and all other public universities in this country. Not forgetting private sector that focuses on certain indigenous knowledge systems and other organizations that focus on that. So we need to form partnerships globally and nationally. Policy implication or policy formulation. Indigenous scholars can influence policy. I've mentioned that a colleague of mine from the Northwest University assisted with the IK Act of 2009 development, and it shows that we can assist with policy formulation or policy amendment. Now, colleagues, there are challenges that okay, I think I have 10 minutes, I'm not sure. But colleagues, please tell me if I'm running out of time. So there are challenges related to IKS in higher education. So IKS faces criticism, from established institutional structures, which are derived from Eurocentric and colonial education values. So as I've indicated, people will say, why IKS? You're wasting your time, And so many universities, public universities in this country, colleagues, they see IKS as a research field where they even apply for funding for projects with the NRF, with the DSI, and they conduct some studies, and that is it. So most universities even do not know that IKS is is an accredited qualification. And I'm saying this and stressing this because this is a correct, this is a correct platform to indicate this, because a lot of Indigenous Knowledge Systems qualification holders struggle to enter institutions as lecturers or research assistants. They struggle because when it gets to an HR level, it's like, what is this? I don't know whether it's rejected from an HR or it goes to the department or school. But a lot of universities in this country do not know that IKS, the Northwest University, produces IKS from undergrad to PhD level. So Indigenous scholars who want to enter the academic space truly struggle because people do not understand the qualification and do not understand that IKS, for instance, and anthropology, making an example, are very linked. Actually, IKS could be seen as a brainchild or linked to anthropology to a certain level. So people do not understand such that heritage studies are indigenous knowledge systems. So that is the challenge. The qualification is not known. A lot of people who are interested in IKS, it is because there is funding for master's or PhD, and therefore they have to tweak their studies to fit IKS in order to receive funding, or they have a project, a 2-year project, and for them to get funding, they must create a proposal on indigenous knowledge systems, and that is it. And hence why people like me exist as an output that of 2017. And to tell you, colleagues, that the IKS program exists, and it existed for the promotion, preservation, and dissemination of this knowledge, and also for community engagement and community development. Also economic development, because traditional or indigenous communities contribute to economic development, making a case of heritage tourism as an example. We do contribute to economic development as indigenous people and the indigenous custodians, and therefore indigenous custodians have to be protected by formal structures, and hence why the IKS qualification is alive today. So in addition, IKS as a program for community engagement, teaching, learning, and research is relatively a new area for both teaching and research. Like I've said, it's new in South Africa, so a lot of people do not understand that. As a result, institutions may encounter issues with the lack of appropriate teaching and learning resources. So there is always that case. Well, where are we going to get resources if we want to develop IKS? Well, Monica Tulsile Buddha, a product of Indigenous Knowledge Systems. So I am an output of IKS, and I have resources of Indigenous Knowledge Systems. Remember, a lot of people will say, I specialize in IKS, or I know IKS, but a lot of people, ladies and gentlemen, know IKS as a research. So a lot of experts to produce their first IKS output in 2017 had to be brought in place in order to produce the first output of the IKS. And we are the first output that started or that got their degrees in 2017. So if we say there are no teaching or learning resources, we have them. That we have the learning resources. Actually, we are the learning resources because we are the first output. So many disciplines came together. So many experts from so many disciplines with IKS as a research interest came together to formulate the first output that was successful in 2017. So another challenge is that institutions may encounter issues with the lack of appropriate teaching and learning. So, like I've indicated, now being a pioneer in IKS, the Northwest University has also faced challenges because of this. Another issue is institutional management reluctance to support IKS. So there are universities that would say, oh no, rather do IKS as a research or open a centanyana. Why a qualification? It is not sustainable. So if there is lack of institutional support, the program will not come to life. Another challenge I've indicated, employment opportunities, collaboration opportunities, and finding niche areas being integrated in other disciplines. So there are difficulties with collaboration opportunities. Actually, if you were to collaborate in IKS, you have to go to, or you have to try to reach out to colleagues from New Zealand, Australia, and Canada, also America, who are very well established when it comes to Indigenous knowledge systems, who have had degrees in IKS for a long period of time. They can understand me better than at home, which is very sad. So ladies and gentlemen, I like doing this a lot. This is one of my favorite slides. Just before I close, I see that I have 4 minutes. So I would like to make myself as an output of IKS. I would like to indicate that I work with the community. Of course, I work for a university, but I work with community, and I found ways of economically developing myself. influence policy and serve in panels, at the same time win awards for being distinguished in the work that I do. So if someone was to ask, what will happen to IKS graduates, or how will these IKS graduates represent the community, represent the institutions, or how do they contribute to research? I, as Monica Tulsile Buta, would like to make myself as a critical example of what happens to the IKS output. And I believe that I am the trial and error that came into existence and that passed at a later stage, because to develop the program was a challenge. There are challenges and prospects, but I am the output of those challenges and prospects. Colleagues, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Monica Tulsile Buta. I'm an Indigenous scholar, a children's author, a declared IKS expert by the National Department of Sports, Arts and Culture, and a multi-winning academic. I hold the Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems with distinction, Master of Indigenous Knowledge Systems with distinction, Doctor of Philosophy in Social Sciences with Indigenous Knowledge Systems. I was awarded in 2024 by the Sunday World Newsletter as an unsung hero in the youth and in academia and education category. I was recognized and selected in 2024 by the National Department of Sports, Arts and Culture to represent South Africa, in a book fair hosted by the government of Venezuela from the 11th to the 21st of July 2024. I am currently a project manager of Ndebele Crafts, which is handled by Prof. Ron English, known as the father of ethnomathematics from the University of Michigan in the United States of America. I was awarded in 2023 by the South African National Heritage Council with an award of the National Voice of Heritage. I was again awarded in 2023 by the Northwest University with an Alumni Excellence Awards within the education category. I have represented the Ndebele women in painting the main gate of the University of Mpumalanga. So if you can Google the University of Mpumalanga or go to your LinkedIn or any space, you will see that the University of Mpumalanga has a painting, and the Ndebele women did not know how to approach the university, and they've asked me to represent them, which is what we should do. We should be representatives of Indigenous people in structures that we know how to follow protocols with, because they do not know the protocol. So we are their representative because we are part of the community. I was recognized with an author spotlight by the University of Calgary, Canada in 2002 for a distinguished publication in IKS. I was certified in 2022. I have a certificate, from UNESCO on living heritage and sustainable development, which I got in 2022. I was recognized by the Northwest University as one of their early career women scientists in 2019. I was selected to represent the Northwest University in a global leadership program in Hanseo University, which is situated in South Korea, and that is in 2016. I am a Golden Key International Honor Society member, and I have thus far published 25 papers, presented actually 35 abstracts. I think after these slides are a bit like 3 months old. So I have 35 abstracts in diverse conferences, and I'm currently an editor of a book which will be published on IGI Global that focuses on Indigenous knowledge systems in contemporary society. These colleagues are the certificates that are offered by the Northwest University South Africa on Indigenous knowledge systems. I'm mentioning them here so that when you see our CVs there, you know that there was once this other lady with dreadlocks who told you about these certificates. Bachelor of Indigenous Knowledge Systems, Master of Indigenous Knowledge Systems, Doctor of Philosophy in Social Sciences with Indigenous Knowledge Systems. All right, I think I am done, colleagues. These are my details for those who want to be in touch. I'm available on LinkedIn, on OCID, ResearchGate, and Google Scholar. And these are my email. Okay, I have 3 email addresses. So the 2 mentioned are personal, and the one that I have, the other one is a professional one. Monica Buddha at University of Mpumalanga, ump.ac.za. But the first two are my personal emails, and those are my contact details. So thank you so much, colleagues, for attending my presentation, and I look forward to collaborating and working with you. Most importantly, I look forward to working with you on IKS related topics and projects that are very important, since most universities in this country do also have a mandate from their own management that they have to integrate IKS. So I look forward to working with you and being part of that journey with you. Thank you.